Whatever you like.
Thank
Oh, we're live.
Yeah, one of us did. All right, so I'm going to call to order this special workshop meeting of the Board of Education on Tuesday, February 2nd. And can we have a roll call?
Yes, Student Board Member Corzo Clark. Don't see him. Student Board Member Mala.
Here.
Trustee Boyd.
Here.
Trustee Davidson.
Here.
Thank you. Trustee Jordan.
Here.
Vice President Doss. President Hinckley.
Here.
Superintendent Wells.
Here.
Great. So I think we have both our student board members, if we could read the mission and vision statement and the meeting norms.
Yes. The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student. And our meeting norms are: maintain a focus on what is best for our students, ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully, endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's beliefs in what is best for students, and 4, make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their points of view.
Thank you. And we can take questions about the agenda, or I can take a motion to approve the agenda for this workshop, which is quite brief.
I move to approve the agenda for tonight's workshop.
I'll second.
Student Board Member Mala.
Yes.
Trustee Davidson, we start with you this evening.
Yes.
Trustee Jordan.
Did student Audrey Mala say yup?
Yeah, I said yes.
Okay, yup, me too.
Okay. Vice President Doss is absent. President Hinckley.
Yes.
And Trustee Boyd.
Yes.
Thank you.
The agenda is approved by 4 board members and 2 student board members with 1 board member absent. So we're going to move right into our governance training discussion. You all know Harold, who is somewhere on our screen over here. I see Vice President Doss now as well. So the way that we talked about structuring this discussion was, you've all had a chance to look through the whole handbook, and you will note that we're not actually discussing the entire handbook today. So the first part of the handbook includes a discussion or a framing of both the mission and vision statement, and then a set of commitments, all of which came out of a strategic planning process that was done quite some time ago. So even though that obviously is a really important part of how we govern, that's not what we're going to focus on tonight. We are at the very end of this meeting going to talk about our process for revisiting those commitments and that mission and vision. But we're going to start our discussion tonight with the content of the handbook that is on page 9, which is the meeting norms and the governance norms, so that we can make sure we're all on the same page about what each of those means. And so I asked everybody to think about whether they're all clear and whether we want to talk about how which ones we could perhaps do a better job of adhering to. So Harold's going to help us answer questions about what those norms imply, or answer any questions or facilitate any discussion about those. And then we'll move into the protocols and the ones that we as a group prioritized. So Harold, I'm going to, I guess, describe what I think your role is in this meeting, and then you can tell me if that's accurate or not. We really want this to be a discussion. We want to make sure that as a team, we all understand the norms to mean the same thing as each other, so that we're not sort of independently interpreting them. And also just to recommit, which we need to do every year, recommit to this set of norms, reapprove the handbook. And so Harold is here because he has a lot of experience with boards and their various struggles to do a good job of governing, because he knows the law in which all of these norms and our own actions take place. So he's happy to facilitate, happy to answer questions. But the idea is not that he's sort of presenting these to us, but that we walk through them as a team. So the idea, we have, sorry, doing the math, we have 1 hour and 20 minutes to get through the norms, and then to focus on, I think we're going to focus on 4 of the protocols. So I think we have a good half an hour at least to walk through just this one page and make sure that we all understand what each of them mean. And then at the end of tonight, we'll talk about whether there are norms that are missing, whether there are things that we want to come back at a future meeting and change. So I think the way I'm imagining structuring the first part of this discussion is just to read each of these out loud, one at a time, and then have a discussion among ourselves about whatever comes up for folks. I don't know if you want to add anything, Harold, about from either your observations about boards in general or our board about how we might want to proceed.
No, Sarah, I think you set the groundwork really well for this. The one thing, and I've talked to your board about this before, you are one of the vast minority of school districts that actually has succinct meeting norms that appear on your agenda and that you read at your meetings. You're also one of the very few school districts that in California really does what good governance suggests you should do, which is you revisit these every year. You revisit the norms and the protocols. What I would suggest tonight, I think echoing what Sarah said, this is an opportunity for you to talk to each other about where you are. I'm happy to jump in, answer questions, help facilitate the discussion. But as you go through both on the norms and the protocols, I think the thing to stay focused on as you read each one, and you've heard this from me before because I've done this with you before, is as you look at it, think, are we doing this? And the next question after the are we doing this is always, if we're not doing it, are we not doing it, A, because we are failing to comply with our norms, or B, have our norms outlived their usefulness and need to be revisited? Same for the protocols. And so as we go through tonight, there's hopefully going to be times where there's constructive comments to one another about maybe where we've strayed from norms, where we've strayed from protocols, where we can do better. And I would just ask you always to keep those questions in mind. Is that because we are not meeting the norms, we're not meeting the protocols that we've all agreed to, or is it because we no longer agree that those are the norms or the protocols, which obviously is a deeper discussion. So that's just to frame things a little bit for tonight.
Great. I'm wondering if there's a way we can each be looking at these and also at each other, because I can't see everybody. So maybe we can, maybe I can read them out loud one at a time, since these are short, and if people have them in front of them too and can reference it, then we can see each other and have more of a conversation. Does that work for people? Okay, so the first one, so we have 4 meeting norms. I will say we condensed these quite a bit last year. The first one is maintain a focus on what is best for our students. So I think, any thoughts about whether this is one that we're doing a good job of sticking to, that you feel we all sort of understand, or if it needs more elaboration?
I'll just start by saying that I think, after 2 years on the board, I think we don't do too bad a job of trying to maintain a focus on what is best for the students. I think in the past we had a conversation about, could our agendas reflect more agenda items that are actually dealing with the students, and sort of, we obviously have lots of other work and some legal work as well around budgets, et cetera. But, construction and all that are so key. But at the same time, if somehow we could really focus more on the students, because CSBA does have there's some research that we really should be focusing approximately 60% of our agendas on student issues. So I think we have, sort of been conscious about that in the last couple of years and trying to do that. I think sometimes we get away from it, but I would, for my part, I would say that in general, we don't do too bad a job on that.
Yeah, Veronica.
From what I've seen and watching the board meetings before joining the board, and now I really want to thank the 3 board members who've been on a little bit longer, because I do think that the 3 of you have continued to keep students at the forefront. And there's been a lot of good reminders when we get into a conversation of, hey, let's revisit, is this really what we're talking about in regards to the students, and is it really helping those students? And there's some particular conversations I can go back to that really, really helps me to refocus in on that. And I think that these board members really get that norm, and it's working really well. I also think that the student board members have really strong voices and really represent a good portion of the community. And it's always refreshing to hear from them and be reminded of, hey, this is really the voice on our campuses or on our virtual classrooms right now. And this is what they really feel like they need or want to convey to all of us. So I would say that and you all have been doing a very good job at this, Norm. And of course, we should just keep reminding each other of it.
I don't mean to put our student trustee on the spot, but I don't know if she has, she's been on, have you been on longer than the rest of us? Trustee Audrey, and if you have any perception about, do you feel that we need to do better at this?
Yeah, I was going to comment after Trustee Davidson. I think there's definitely, I've seen progress from when I first stepped on the board. And I think one thing that in particular that I think has really helped is we did a workshop on prioritizing what issues the board would like to see addressed. So from just taking the issues bin, and I think from that workshop, we were able to see that all board members collectively do have a focus on this norm. I think also we've seen more in the past year or so presentations directly from students, which has really helped, like such as DON, or we did the 21st Century Learning Initiative. We are continuing to do that. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of progress. Obviously, we can always grow, but I'm grateful that I do believe there is a prioritization of student voice.
Any other thoughts before we move to norm 2?
Yeah, I think that everybody, hi everybody, good evening. I think that everybody does a good job with this. I think that there's room for improvement. I think that, and I'll just speak about myself. I think that there's always room for improvement. I think that understanding the perspectives of all students takes time. And I think that some perspectives might come naturally because you might be able to directly relate to them. But relating to the perspectives of others that you might not be able to relate to, that might not be from similar background, is sometimes more difficult. So I'll just say myself personally, I look forward to working on that to become a better board member.
Thank you and welcome. I will say one thing that I struggle with, I think all of us maybe feel this, so and maybe I'm not the only one, but is that it's impossible to do what's best for each student all the time. That every decision involves trade-offs, and I think that's one of the adjustments from being a parent advocating for your own kid to being a board member, is that suddenly I have to weigh, you know, what's best for my student may involve a sacrifice from some other student. And it's, you know, particularly this year, it's been very challenging because we don't get to give each and every student what's the very best for them. And so that's, I think, one of the things that came out of our conversation last year that was really helpful was to acknowledge that we can each be trying our best to do what we feel is best for the most number of students or the students that we feel need the most support. But that still might lead to different positions, right? We might not always agree on the best way to help the most students, even if we all share that same mission. And so helping each other to remind, you know, keeping that mission at the forefront, you know, as our first norm, I think is always helpful for me to just remember, what can I do to sort of think about who I'm trying to really reach, or how to weigh those challenging trade-offs. Yeah. I don't know if that gets easier over time. Probably not. All right. So we'll move on to number 2, which is to ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully. So there's several different components to this. So the safe environment, and then being able to express all views, and then thinking about ourselves as board members, staff, and the public.
Sarah, if I can, maybe just to help things get kicked off a little bit.
Yeah.
This was one that we spent a fair amount of time on previously, because it was one area where I think just about everybody on the board felt like there could be improvement. And so as an outsider, if you will, looking into the board, I'm curious over the course of the last year, particularly for those who've been on the board that whole time, but really for all of you who've been watching the board this whole time, is this an area that is trending up, that you're working towards, it's getting better? Or is this an area that there's been what I always refer to as mission drift, that you may be getting a little bit farther away from? Because this was such a focus of what we talked about last time. And the other comment I'll just make is the safety issue. You know, that we are living in a really unusual time right now between the pandemic and national politics and the economy. There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of tension. And I work with a lot of school districts, and we're starting to see more of that stress and tension show up on the dais by the school boards. And we're starting to see more of it showing up with the comments from the audience and recall efforts and threats of lawsuits. And it's getting rough out there. So I'm actually particularly interested to hear how folks on the board feel this is trending.
That's a really good question. Go, Trustee Duran.
I guess nobody else wants to, so what the heck, I'll jump in. You know, Harold and everybody, I think it's kind of gone up and down in terms of, first of all, the safe environment. At times I have not felt safe from 2 years ago till today. And so I think it's something that, and I guess I need to talk about me, that I think it's important that I keep remembering exactly what you're talking about, the atmosphere that we're all living in today, and all the stress is something that we have to, I think, take a deep breath when we get into some heavy conversations about kids and the passions that we all feel. And some of us are more expressive about those passions, and we don't want them to be taken in a wrong manner. But I personally maybe need to step back and say, am I presenting my viewpoint in a way that may feel hostile or unsafe? Or another board member no longer feels comfortable that they can say something for a variety of reasons, that I might attack their view, or that, not to offend me, that kind of thing. So I just think it's something that I personally need to, continue to remember, to remind myself. One thing that I feel is that, staff doesn't really speak unless we're calling them out to speak about specific items. And I do feel that in the past, we have sort of put a lot of pressure on the staff. I mean, I can speak for myself. I'd like to see this, and I would like to see this report. And can we do a presentation on this? And so there has been, I feel, a lot of pressure put on the staff, but the superintendent's been pretty good about protecting the staff in the sense that, well, start with me and I'll respond to whatever. But I think that at the same time, my last comment I'll say is that I think, 2 comments, is that I think in our meetings, we pretty much respect the public. I do not see any issues that have come out in the past. I think we've been pretty good with the general public. But once again, I want to zero back on staff, that I think sometimes we're either taking the staff for granted, or we feel that and I'll just say it plainly, that we feel we're the bosses of the staff, and we're not their bosses. The superintendent is our only employee, and the staff falls under the superintendent. So I think I would really want all of us to really focus on being as respectful, doubling over twice to be respectful with the staff.
President Hinckley, can you read the,
Yeah.
can you read one more time? If you wouldn't mind?
Ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully.
So I think that I think this is easy when we're all talking about something that everybody agrees with. I think that it's just easy to do. It's easy to come across as polite and respectful when we're all talking about something that everybody's on the same page about. I think that sometimes we talk about stuff that people aren't going to agree with. I think that sometimes we talk about stuff and what we say it might come across as offensive. I think that it might come across as controversial. And I think that sometimes we might say stuff that people just flat out don't like. And I think that there's 2 things that we need to remember when we're having these discussions. One, that it's not a personal attack on anybody, because I think that we all genuinely like each other. And I think that at one time or another, I've spent time hanging out individually with everybody that I can see on the screen. We've either went to lunch or we've had coffee. Some of you have been to my home. So I feel like when we're just kind of hanging out, that we're very friendly. And I think that that's great. I think that when it comes to the discussions that we're having and the meetings that we have, it's a thin line, and you can either tread lightly and then maybe your point doesn't get across, and then maybe there are a group of students that don't receive the help that they need because you're trying to thread that thin line, or you just kind of say what needs to be said and you put it out there. That doesn't always come across the best way, and it's not always received the best way, and that can make things tough. The second thing that I think is important to remember as we go through this is that the board meetings are exactly that. They are board meetings. They are the meetings for the 5 board members that everybody else is invited to attend. I think that sometimes we get off track a little bit because we bring in the community members, and I think the last meeting the community members started like asking questions of the presenter, and it was, so I think that sometimes it's tough, and we get a little off track because I think that we forget that the board meeting is indeed just a board meeting, that us 5, any other company or job, it would just be us 5 sitting in a room having the meeting, and then we will report out to everybody else whatever we wanted them to hear. But because of the rules and regulations and how this is set up, we have to do this in public for everybody to see, but it is still the board meeting. And so sometimes I just think that that gets off track. But the main thing I think is important for us to remember is that we're all here for the same reason. And I think that we all have our causes and we will speak to them and things like that. But I don't think that anybody here is purposely trying to offend anybody else or be disrespectful to anybody else, or for anybody to feel threatened or scared or uncomfortable, or that they can't speak or say anything. So for this portion of it, I will say that if I've ever made anybody feel that way or feel like they can't speak, I apologize for that. You should feel free to say whatever it is that you like to say. And I respect everybody's opinion. If I have ever offended anybody by the comments that I've made, I apologize for that as well. It was not my intention. I like everybody here. I am passionate about kids, and I'm definitely passionate about kids that are often forgotten about and kind of pushed to the side or slip between the cracks because they're not the majority. But in no way have I ever purposely tried to offend anybody or hurt anybody's feelings. That is not my purpose. My purpose is just to advocate for students. And so I will continue to work on that as we move forward, but I thought it was important to bring this to this discussion. Thanks.
Trustee Davidson. Oh.
I was gonna say how
there you are.
nicely this conversation. Oh, can you hear me? Sorry. I was gonna follow that and say how nicely this segues into the 3rd meeting norm and how my thinking about the 2 of those sort of came hand in hand. And I can save the rest until we're ready to move on to that, because I think I'm gonna sway my comments more that way.
I think it's okay to move into that one. I think some of what Vice President Doss said also ties to that. But before we do, was there anybody else who wanted to say anything about number 2?
I would. Oh, sorry. Did I cut anybody off? Okay. Just that I think it's a particularly difficult one to uphold right now, both because we're dealing with very difficult issues where, as President Hinckley said, I mean, I'm clearly new to this, but I would imagine there's lots of times where you feel like you can't be doing what's best for everyone. But I feel like right now it feels to me as if we're at some sort of a height of how difficult it is to feel like you're doing what's best for everyone. And that's across students, teachers, staff, families, just the whole, and the needs are so great and so important, and the stakes are so high. So I think that makes it difficult. And also just the fact that, and I've never done this in person, so I don't know, but I do know that in general, when you're not physically with people, it's easier to be nasty, and to forget that we're all, just full-fledged regular human being folks, like, I believe doing the best that we can. And so I would just say that I think that this is a particularly challenging time to try to uphold number 2, but I think that it's really important. And I think that we can hopefully all find the place where we are being true to ourselves and what we believe, and recognizing how important it is to stand up for the communities and the goals and the policies, et cetera, that are important to us, but to make sure that the respectful piece, that we never lose sight of that. That's it.
Thank you. Trustee Duron, did you want to say something about number 2? You're muted, though.
Sorry. I sort of wanted to add on to what Trustee Boyd was saying, that definitely stakes are high, both pre-pandemic and in pandemic and post-pandemic. Stakes will always be high because we're talking about the most precious things we have, right? So, and I think, I understand, because I feel pressure too every day, and I think saying the best that we can sometimes isn't enough. And in particular, I would go back to zeroing back on number 1, which is we're trying to focus on the students. And I fear that if the students, especially our trustees, are part of our meetings and see that we are beyond being able to control our own feelings, where people may feel unsafe or people may feel disrespected, then I think, I think we really have to ask ourselves as trustees who were given this charge by the community, that we're going to have to step up just a little bit higher. We absolutely have to in our meetings, because we're role models for the kids, whether we want to be or not. And yes, we are very human, but we're going to have to be superhuman. I mean, I think that's where we have to go. And honestly, I in thinking about it, I don't know how hard it is to be respectful to people. I know we're passionate and care so much about what we're doing, but at the same time, how difficult is it to be respectful to other people and to not make other people inadvertently feel bad? And I don't think it's that difficult to figure out what are we saying that could potentially make other people feel bad, because the focus is certainly not other people. The focus is on an issue that we have. So I think we need to focus more on our issues and not say things that are hurting other people, which is what has happened in the past. And I think I don't just want to go through the norms and we go, yep, that's a good norm. And yep, we like that. And we're going to do the best possible. I think we really need to look at that and say, what am I doing that maybe potentially be impeding this norm or the success of all of us working together? And then we go forward, because otherwise we're just going to go check, check. We're all doing as best as we can. I think, like I said, I think we have to do better than the best that we can. At least, I just think as long as we're on the board, we're going to have to do a little bit better than best.
So I do, I think some of what we're talking about reaches into the idea of how do we express ourselves and interact, particularly when we disagree, right? When things are more challenging. So I do want to make sure we keep moving to sort of get to those expressions in the norms. So Superintendent Wells, I assume you're still on this item, and then I'm going to come back to Trustee Davidson when we move to the next norm.
Thank you, Madam Chair, President Hinckley. I just wanted to offer all of us some basic reminders, more like humanitarians, just that I think are critical for us to adhere to as leaders. One is it's critically important for us to be hard on issues, but soft on people. And let me say that again, because I think it's important for us to marinate on that. Hard on issues, soft on people. That's important. The other piece is subscribing to the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Those are two basic fundamental leadership things that that ought not just be rhetoric, but congruent with our actions. So under this piece, the things that helped me over the decades of leadership, always pause and treat people the way you want to be treated. And also to be hard on issues, really tough on issues, but soft on people.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next one. I think, you know, we all recognize these are overlapping, so I don't think we've walked away from this issue. So the third one I will read before Trustee Davidson speaks to it. Endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's beliefs in what is best for students. And this is another one I think we rewrote last year to try to sort of marry these ideas of collaboration and trying to find common ground without giving up what you think, you know, what your beliefs are. So Trustee Davidson.
Well, I want to say first, I think this is a really solid norm to have, a really strong one, and it really goes along with sort of my mantra all the time, is to find collaborative solutions. And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking to find solutions to problems, and the board is presented with problems and our district staff is presented with problems. And then the job is to find solutions that are as good as they can be. And as we've said many times, they're not always going to be the best for everybody. And it's really hard because what I knew before joining the board, but I'm becoming more aware of, is when you're one of the district leaders or a board member, you hear a lot about what's not working for people and what they really want to push you to do. It's really hard to continue to kind of say, okay, that's one side, that's one voice. But when we step into these meetings, we're looking at the whole picture. We're looking at all of the students in the district, and that's not just those few. When we can make a decision that's really going to benefit many of our students, or hey, that voice really does have something valid behind it and I need to listen to it and maybe change my viewpoint or ask for more information. So one thing I did say on this goal, this norm specifically, is I feel like our decisions in these meetings, the few that I've been in, there's a rush behind them. We're presented with information and then we read some on it, and then we're in the meeting, and when we really start to deliberate and get into it, like in this conversation, I feel like people are able to circle back and really give it some time and thought and to marinate, as Dr. Wells said. But in the meetings, I don't think there's really an opportunity for us to delve in there together, and we're not allowed to talk about this as a group anywhere but in these meetings. And it's our only opportunity to really come together and say, hey, this is my viewpoint and my viewpoint, and how do we work them together? And when it's always got this rush behind it, or, okay, now we have to move to this and that, it doesn't allow us to really have that time for finding collaborative solutions to these problems. And I just also wanted to follow that with, I do feel very supported by the members of the board and the district staff. And sorry, I jumped down, sorry. I just think that if we have more time, we're going to make more informed and thoughtful and thorough decisions. And I don't quite know how to do that. Our board meetings are already really long. So that's just sort of a a dream in the sky, but I think with a little more opportunity for us as board members to just really talk through an issue and make sure we're hearing from everyone. And when a question comes up, I felt a couple times in these few board meetings, like, wait a second, I'm still not really clear on that answer, but I don't want to jump back in and ask again because I don't want to take the time and then extend the meeting. And I'm going to do more to do my homework in advance and feel more prepared. But I still think I've noticed a couple times in our meetings that things all of a sudden come in at the meeting time that I was not aware of before. And it makes it really hard to continue with making a solid decision when you're kind of thrown for a loop.
Great, thank you. Trustee Duron.
You know, as Trustee Davidson was talking, I was thinking of a couple of solutions because I feel exactly like you do. We don't really have the time to listen to other people, to other board members' ideas and marinate in them. And I have a couple of thoughts, but I don't know if it's appropriate to throw them out or if it's down the road somewhere.
I mean, I think if they're tied to how successfully we can follow this norm, then throw them out. I'm taking notes so we can build them into a process later.
Okay, well, I think I might have mentioned at least one of them already, which is if all of us could commit to asking as many questions, sorry, staff, as is possible when the agendas come up, that will help. That will not only help each board member, but it helps all of us because we ultimately see the responses from the staff. So it gives us more ideas about the issue. And I've seen when other staff trustees have asked questions, that's something I wouldn't have even have thought to ask. So it's very, very helpful if the trustees could spend just a little bit of time really looking at the agenda and asking the questions that they want answered. And the second thing is, I don't know, I mean, this would be definitely informal, but if as say I'm really committed to some idea, maybe I would choose the board member that I think would be the opposite view as me, and I'd reach out to that trustee so we, at least two of us, could have a conversation so I could better understand that other viewpoint that, you know, I barely would hear at a regular meeting.
So we may, if we get to the protocols tonight, we will be talking through the agenda questions one. It strikes me that, you know, this meeting norm, if it's just applied to a meeting, is quite ambitious, right? It's difficult to find collaborative solutions in the middle of a board meeting. I think the sort of trying to find common solutions without sacrificing one's beliefs was a thing that was important to us to figure out. But I think you may have hit on some of the limitations of how much you can actually accomplish this in a meeting. So that may be something that we want to think about, you know, over time as we come back to this handbook or figure out how that gets built into other governance functions. So we have one more meeting norm, but I want to give everyone a chance to comment on this one before I read it. Okay, so our last one is we agree to make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening and considering with an open mind, while others are allowed to express their points of view, even if one disagrees. You'll note our theme for last year was
I'll jump.
how to disagree productively. Yes, go ahead, Trustee Davidson.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if my internet froze for a second and you were in the middle of a comment, but I was just going to say, I think in our previous discussions about the other norms that we've really gone into this a little bit. And as you said, they're all really well tied into one another. And effective deliberation just the only thing is it takes time. So I like Clementina's suggestion that, you know, we can kind of have that opportunity through our questions to the staff members, and that's probably the best way to start that deliberation a little bit earlier to give ourselves more time.
I just wanted to point out that the last 3 words of that are not on the agenda. We read them every meeting, even if one disagrees.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really been there, from what I remember.
Good to know.
I will make sure that's corrected right away.
And Julie, if I can make a comment on this one, because I know we spent a lot of time on this one previously when the board addressed this. One of the concepts we really talked about was that concept of listening. You know, it emphasizes that there's people often forget that communication is not just the talking part, it's the listening part. It's constructive listening skills, which sometimes means really making sure that you are taking pause, not just doing what we do by human nature, which is while someone else is talking, you're formulating what you're going to say, but really to stop and listen and absorb and take in what they're saying, let the person finish. I always point out that a high sign of a dysfunctional board is interruption. So that I just wanted to kind of revisit some of those themes we talked about when this norm was revisited. And I think that maybe that even if one disagrees got added as part of this, and that may be why it's not on the agenda. That's a good catch. But I would emphasize to all of you, one of the greatest skills is listening. It's actually being quiet. I've used the analogy with you before. You know, you have one mouth and 2 ears for a reason. You should be listening twice as much as you are speaking, and truly listening. And if somebody feels that when they're speaking, they're truly being listened to and heard, that goes very much back to that, the other norms about being respectful. So these all tie together really nicely.
It also reminds me of sort of what Trustee or Vice President Doss was saying about this is our only opportunity as a board to talk to each other. And so we do hear from the public in the meetings, we hear from the staff, but really we hear from the public and we talk to staff all the time outside of the meetings. This is really my only opportunity to really hear what Brian, Melissa, Veronica, and Clementina think about all these things, and Audrey and Leo. So I think that is an important reminder that that is part of the point of these meetings, is that we can really, it's our only opportunity to hear what all of our other colleagues are thinking about. And that makes it especially important, especially to hear from the board members, because you know, we do get public comment during meetings, but we also all get many emails and hear from and are allowed to talk to the public freely in other forums, but we're not allowed to talk to other or hear from other board members. So I appreciate you reminding us that that was important when we talked about this last year.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry. I just jumped in. Did I cut anybody off?
Nope.
Okay, cool. I think this one is particularly important because a lot of times people already have their mind made up one way or the other. And so that makes it really tough to hear what other people are saying. And I would, for myself, and if others would like to, feel free, but no pressure. And I'm not telling anybody what to do. But for myself, I'm going to do more of coming into the situation without already having my mind made up. Doing the research and making sure that I understand the facts and understand the situation, but not with my mind already made up, allowing for the 4 of you to share your thoughts on it, and then making a decision based on all the information that we have. I think that is kind of part of, or the essence of what this is saying, is like for people not to just listen, but to really hear what people are saying, and not to just come into it with, I got my vote, and then everybody's kind of just talking, and then you end up voting the same way, because people make a lot of good points. And so, you know, somebody might make a point that you didn't think about. You have been thinking yes all week, and somebody makes a really good point, and so then, you know, you might end up, you know, going no, and that might be what's best for students. But if you don't truly hear what other people are saying, that then you might miss that. So I'm definitely gonna take that approach as I move forward. I think I've been doing that so far, but I'm gonna be more diligent.
Thank you. Trustee Duran.
I agree with Vice President Doss. I'm going to do the same thing. I tend to come to meetings with my mind pretty much made up, or I'm really clear about what I'm committed to, right? And it's really hard to do otherwise. So there's pretty smart people on the board, I have to admit it, and I need to listen, because there may be some really viable or compromising solutions that, if we really listen to each other, we could get to. And that would be a real accomplishment, when we really take our ideas and sort of mesh them together and come up with some compromise. And I know in the past we've discussed the word compromise, and sometimes we don't like that because it sounds like we're selling out, right, our beliefs or whatever. But a compromise could, you know, the silver lining, or we just don't look at it in a certain way, and all of a sudden it ends up being the perfect solution. I just wanted to ask if at the end of number 4, I don't know if this really flows with it, but it sort of does, that after, even if one disagrees, and then just say, you know, we'll maintain a commitment to disagree respectfully. I mean, I don't know if, you know, given how we initially talked about environments, and when we're committed, we go in there, we put our head down, blah, 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 and we get all warmed up. If we could somehow keep going back to reminding ourselves to disagree respectfully.
I'm writing that down. One of the things that we, you know, talked about last year was, and it is one of our protocols, although it isn't one of the ones we were going to focus on in this meeting, but was, you know, what do we do if things get heated during a meeting and we feel that we're not adhering to that basic set of norms? And so we actually wrote a protocol, or you know, adapted a protocol to do sort of what you're describing, which is to have the president step in, and or it could be another board member, to just say, you know, here, let's read through the meeting norms again to remind, you know, all of those words you just said are in those meeting norms in one configuration or another, about disagreeing and being respectful and creating a safe environment. So I think we can continue over the year to revisit whether that's an effective strategy for reminding ourselves of that. I think it's, when we're physically in meetings, it has sometimes been easier to take a clear break. The dynamics are a little bit different on Zoom. I think it, you know, you don't have the same sort of physical energy in a room that moves and allows you to really cool things down. But we may decide that we want to revisit that protocol in the future, if we feel that that's an important thing to do. Any other thoughts on that last meeting norm?
Sarah, if I can, just, I wanted to share one example, I think picking up on what Clementina and Brian had to say about coming in with an open mind. I've shared this story before, I know, with you, and I'll share it here, that I worked with a school district that had one board member who was very passionate about math. That was their cause that they championed. And they had a situation where they were revisiting their math curriculum. They appointed a community committee. They had the math department heavily involved, the administration heavily involved. They came up with a plan and they brought it to the board. It had been worked on extensively, and 4 of the board members were listening and nodding in agreement. And this 5th board member, who really felt passionate about this issue, really came down pretty hard on the plan, disagreed with the plan, really thought there was a better way to do things. And what ended up happening, which was really interesting, was the other 4 board members could have said, well, we're just going to vote now and you're wrong. It's going to be a 4-1 vote and we're going to move forward. But what they witnessed and what the board president picked up on was that the person who was in the minority, the one board member who was not in support of the program, was not feeling heard, was not really feeling like they were being listened to, that this was a sort of all or nothing discussion. And what they also recognized was that the staff was not feeling heard because by this one board member. And so what the board president proposed was an amendment to the motion to approve the curriculum that would be to bring the curriculum back after a set period of time. I don't recall if it was 6 months or a year, with specific metrics to be developed by this committee and by the superintendent to come back to the board and see how it was actually doing. And in the end, it was a 4-1 vote, but it was a very respectful 4-1 vote. And when the item came back later for a revisit of, do we want to keep going down this path? Is it working? It ended up being a 5-0 vote, because that one board member felt like they'd made their point, they'd been heard, they'd been able to move on from it. And they were seeing that basically it was working. And so it was a wonderful moment and a reminder how any one board member can catch the moment when others, all of these norms, are not feeling safe, are not feeling listened to, are not feeling like there's effective deliberation going on. It's okay to stop and see where compromise is allowed, where you can incorporate the feelings of the other person and the opinions and create this place of safety for everybody. When a 4-1 vote does not become an angry 4-1 vote, it becomes a very respectful 4-1 vote. And it's okay. You don't want a board that's 5-0 on everything. That can actually be a warning sign that you're not engaged in effective deliberation. On some of the big stuff, hopefully you'll get to that 5-0. So I just wanted to share that story because it kind of reminds me of the importance of listening and coming to this with an open mind.
Trustee Davidson.
I wanted to Google the word deliberation. So I just looked it up, and it's just to remind myself, long and careful consideration or discussion. And just one quick thought I had, especially after what Harold said, people feeling heard. I know I have a problem sometimes where my comments get really long-winded and they just keep going. I don't give people the chance to then open up a discussion with me about something. I just go. And I'm wondering if we could all, when we're really feeling passionate about something, we really want to share something, before we say it, maybe just say, hey, these are the 2 bullet points I really want. And Clementina, you actually do a beautiful job at this, because you always say, okay, I have 1 and then I have 2. And it really helps me to focus in on, okay, these are the points she thinks are really important, and this is what she wants us all to respond to. I think that if we could all, try and do that a little bit, we could help each other to engage in the discussion. And then when we're making those points, say, okay, this is point 1, let's discuss. Then we come back, this is point 2, let's discuss. Because when any of us get into that big, long thing, we lose sight of the point that we're really trying to open up for discussion and deliberation.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about from your definition of deliberation, what does that sort of require of each of us, both in how we listen, but also in how we speak? Who are we speaking to? What is it we're trying to get across? I think is an important thing to be mindful of. As someone who tends to ask 7 questions in a row. Any other thoughts on this last meeting norm? All right, so I want to have us take maybe about 12 minutes to do the governance norms. So I am going to, I think I can share my screen here, Julie. Oops, now I lost all you guys. Are you looking at the governance norms?
Yeah.
Okay, so rather than, maybe we can just read through these, and then since we have to sort of, agree that we're all going to comply with them, but just talk about those that people feel need clarification or emphasis. So I'll read the first two, and then we can rotate. We agree to value, support, and advocate for public education, keeping learning and achievement for all students as our primary focus. 2, to be an effective team with a common focus on achieving district goals, never a distraction to the district or community. Trustee Boyd, you're next in my, screen.
Okay, so read 2, like the next 2.
Yeah.
We agree to number 3, act with dignity and understand the implications of demeanor and behavior. Number 4, to recognize and respect differences of perspective and style on the board and among staff, students, families, and the community.
Trustee Duran, can you read 5 and 6?
Okay, we agree to 5, participate in professional development and commit the time and energy necessary to be informed and effective leaders. And we agree to understand the distinctions between board and staff roles and refrain from stepping out of our role.
And Vice President Doss, can you read those?
Partner with staff for positive change, accept that authority rests with the board as a whole and not with individuals.
I actually can't remember if we changed any of these last year or not, but so any comments, I think, on, which ones, if there's one you want to call out as being especially important to you or one that you have questions about. And then for this overall set of norms, are there aspects of what we need to be doing that are missing from this list? Because I think the intent of the protocols is that it fleshes out in great detail, and we're going to talk through a few of those, things that are part of our sort of day-to-day operations. But this is what we all really commit to. So if there are elements that you think are not represented, that also is something we could discuss. So Trustee or Vice President Doss.
I wanted to take a closer look at number 7, just because we were just talking about how the Dr. Wells is our only employee and not the staff. So should we take a closer look at number 7? Should we reword it? Just wondering, just want to get people's thoughts on that.
What are your thoughts about whether this sort of whether you think it effectively represents how we're supposed to be operating, or if you think that it needs more clarification to reflect that relationship that you're drawing attention to? What do you think might need to be different about it?
Yeah, I just think it needs more clarity. And I think that it needs to better reflect the relationship that we want to see. Because I'm assuming that in order for us to govern the way that it was set up for us to govern, that this would be more for us to not necessarily, I mean, we're all working together towards one goal, but staff doesn't report to us. They report to the superintendent and the superintendent reports back to the board. So maybe just more clarity on that of how we really want to see the relationship. That way there's no confusion.
Great, thank you. So before we talk more about how we would go about clarifying that, does anyone want to articulate what they think this norm means to them or what it reflects in terms of how we interact with staff? Yeah, sorry, trustee Boyd.
I think that it, and I guess unsurprisingly, goes with some of what we were saying before, but what that means to me is, for one, kind of an assumption that we're all on the same team working toward the same goal. And for instance, it can relate to when we ask questions and request certain information, to have more clarity and more understanding of what, maybe what policies are being put forth or what ideas are coming from the staff. But I think that, to me, that suggests a belief in sort of the commonality of goal and purpose and working toward getting to as strong of a policy as possible, or that does what we're trying to do, which is support and advocate for the needs of all children in the district. So I think respect is a part of it, and sort of benefit of the doubt and good intentions, and then also, as Trustee Duran has talked about, asking questions and getting information that will be helpful to put the strongest policy forward.
Any other thoughts on this one? I think we did actually revise this last year, now that I'm remembering some of it. And I think part of what we wanted to do was, there are these two here that are about staff, right? There's understanding that staff operate in the implementation sphere and the board operates in the policy setting. And so understanding those sort of distinctive spheres, but we also wanted to reflect the fact that we do actually work a lot with staff when we sit on committees, when we're asking them for information, when we're talking with them in board meetings. So I think these two norms are sort of doing two different things. One is to try to articulate more of how we partner with staff. I think, as you said, Trustee Boyd, following a lot of the same principles that we want to use in meetings, but throughout all of our interactions on committees and information requests and so forth, that we see them as partners, even though we don't supervise them, right? But we are working together toward a shared goal. Are there other governance norms that people want to make sure we talk through before we switch over to protocols? Trustee Duran.
Yes, two. In terms of number 2, be an effective team. Well, what does that mean? How do we define being an effective team? Because I think absolutely I want to be part of an effective team. But what does that mean? And I had written down some things that, we've actually continued to discuss tonight, including coming with an open mind, looking at the whole picture, developing collaborative, positive partnerships, not only with each other, but with the superintendent and staff. Value, trust, respect, and open and honest communication, demonstrate respectful behavior, agree to resolve conflicts. And I think that's really important. And I don't think we have a process for how we resolve conflicts. And maybe that's something down the road we need to include in our governor's handbook. And the second and the last one is act as a team, that there's no I in we. I think sometimes it's hard for us to remember that we really are just one person, and it's the team effort that's what's important. So somewhere along the line, I think it's really important that we emphasize the we part of this and not the I. And then the other that I wanted to discuss was actually just a suggestion for a number 9, which was and I got this out of the training from CSBA, which hopefully the 2 new board members will be getting as well. It's from a lighthouse study that CSBA refers to all the time. And the idea is that we agree to work diligently with the superintendent, because it is proven that, quote, a dramatic growth in student achievement coincides with periods of high trust between the superintendent and the board, unquote. And that would all, if we all work so closely with the superintendent and I had a great relationship, what couldn't we do in our district?
Great, thank you. Trustee Davidson.
I think those are really great points, and the trusting relationship, that's a word I've heard a lot recently, is trust, and how much more people want trust. And that's something we can all be working on all the time. The notes I made on this is I think this is an area that we can all work on, as teamwork is always an area to be strengthened. And this is what I was going to say. I wanted to say I feel really supported by the members of the board and the district staff. But I also think that while we're supporting each other and we're working on those, making sure that our conversations and the things that we're putting forward on the agenda, we are clearly defining how those meet the district goals, as is in this norm, and that we're stating that in our comments that, hey, if we make this change or we go this way, we are better meeting a district goal, and that we're kind of keeping that. I read that in one of the things somewhere.
Great, thank you. So I've made a couple of notes about things that may need elaboration, what it means to really work as a team, and then process for resolving conflicts, and also something addressing our relationship with the importance of working closely with the superintendent as a team. Any other? I can't see all of you at once, and I don't know if everyone's hand raising is working. So someone wave if you see me not calling on someone. If not, I'm going to assume that we are all agreeing to this set of meeting norms and governance norms, and then we'll move on to discussing the protocols that we identified for a sort of brief walkthrough clarification. And then, as I said, at the end of this meeting, we'll talk about sort of next steps for revising any parts of this that we want to revisit over the years. Great. So the 4 protocols that, I don't know how to share this part, but there were 4 protocols that we identified that more than one board member brought up. So maybe the easiest way to do this is to share the table of contents here. And they were number 3, which is agenda questions asked before a board meeting. Number 9, board electronic communications. And number 11, board members' role in public, and number 23, parliamentary procedures and conduct of board meetings, which actually mostly refers to the rules of order, which is an appendix to this handbook. So let's see, I'm trying to think of the most efficient way to go through this. I'll keep sharing my screen and we can look at each one. And then those who raised it, we can talk about. Sorry to make you dizzy. I don't have a easy way to go through this. Let's see. All right, agenda questions asked before a board meeting. So we have a principle, which is treating staff members' time and expertise with respect. We have a protocol that we've revised a little bit. Well, there's no timing in here, but we last year sort of re-emphasized the importance of the board getting the full agenda packet, including all attachments, I believe by Thursday, so that the board can send all questions before Monday, which gives the staff sufficient time to provide a response to all board members. So I think part of the emphasis is just that we all reaffirm that this is an important part of our relationship with staff. It's an important part of preparing for the board meetings because it does help us to get more of those clarifications done outside of the meeting, which makes us all more prepared and also avoids surprising staff members. So I don't know if folks who wanted to talk about this wanted just to emphasize this protocol or if there are things that we want to further elaborate or discuss. Or if everyone can just give a thumbs up that this is clear and we're affirming our commitment to it. And I can only see half your thumbs. There we go. All right.
Thumbs up.
Great. So the second one was board electronic communications, and we talked some about this as it relates to the Brown Act and our responsibilities as ethical public officials in our last governance training. So this covers how we respond to emails, how we interact on social media. We have not updated this protocol to reflect new law in social media, which I think Harold noted last time. And then there's some additional clarifications about how board members should respond to inquiries, whether these are in person or over email. And this is quite an elaborate protocol. So if those who had questions want to raise them, or we could ask Harold if there are additional things that we didn't sort of cover in the last governance training that we should make sure we clarify now. Trustee Duran.
Thank you. There was a couple of issues. One was the emails, the bullet point on page 15 that says emails addressed to the entire board or to multiple board members. The last sentence there reads, and this was just because I didn't understand, the superintendent and president will copy each other on all correspondence that is in response. As an individual board member, when I respond to community letters, do I need to copy the superintendent and the president of the board in my individual response?
I don't think so. I think there was a I thought there's a lot of language in here, some of which repeats itself. I understood the main concern to be that it's the president's job to make sure that the superintendent has received the original inquiry and that the president and superintendent copy each other, but that how other board members respond, they do, unless they see that the president is not copied on it, they don't need to answer it, or they don't need to copy the president. I think this doesn't cover an email that just goes to one board member, right? So you still, you know, I don't know if there's a legal reason why you would need to, but I read this as addressing emails that go to the whole board.
Okay. Harold, were you going to respond to that at all, or does that sound right?
Yeah, if I can just note one thing, you know, there is the bullet point at the top of page 15 that when a board member receives a simple inquiry, not addressed to the superintendent or other board members. So there's a little bit of discussion about when somebody gets the individual inquiry and the process to be followed. So I think that's addressed. The one thing to bear in mind that isn't necessarily addressed that your question, Clementine, actually raises, whenever you respond to a member of the public about an item that's within the district's jurisdiction, which presumably is what you're talking to them about, it is a public record. And so there are districts that I work with that have consciously decided that board members, when they have dialogues by email using their district account, which this protocol also says you should do, that they copy the superintendent. So if a Public Records Act request comes in, you don't have to go back and find all of your sent mails and received mails, and there's a repository at the district of the communications that went on. You have to be a little careful about how those get shared with the other board members just because of the Brown Act limitation, but that's just a procedural thing for you all to consider. If you don't do that, if the Public Records Act request comes in, you'll probably get contacted by Dr. Wells and asked to search all of your own emails for that.
I guess, you know, if I could just follow up specifically on that, does that not get to a point where you're just overwhelming the superintendent with all these emails that he ultimately has to go through?
I think it depends. It's almost an IT issue, if you will, because we have some districts where just automatically, if you send something out, you copy, for example, Julie, don't listen to this, the superintendent's assistant, just so it gets logged in somewhere so it can be found again. It's something that you don't have to resolve today, but it's something to think about. In some districts, the answer is, well, if everybody's using their district email, then IT can already access that in the event of a public records request. So it's just a matter of thinking through how you want to make things work if a Public Records Act request comes in. There's nothing wrong legally with anything the way that you have it here. With the exception, and we'll come back to that, that there are some legal updates around social media, but that's another point we'll come to.
Okay, and the second and last issue that I had wanted to discuss with everybody was the third from the bottom of the page 15, the third bullet from the bottom, which says if a board member becomes aware of issues of concern, the board member should request to talk to the superintendent. Sometimes I've heard in meetings that issues come up that came from, I guess, community people to board members, and it's like a total surprise to me. And I don't know if those issues have been sent to the superintendent or not. So I guess I'm just kind of concerned that, or wanted to reiterate that if any of us get emails or issues from the community that are concerning, that we right away talk to the superintendent, so that the, you know, if the issue is to be resolved or whatever, or it becomes a further issue down the road, the superintendent has a handle on it and will be addressing it, as opposed to us opening up the issue at a board meeting, at a public board meeting, when it's a total surprise to people. So I guess the board member should request to talk to the superintendent. I just wanted to clarify that we all understood that if we get something from an individual board community person and it's an issue of concern, that we should, well, they all are issues of concern, but that, you know, we would use our discretion and certainly let the superintendent know.
Any other comments or questions about this one? We do need to update this protocol for social media, but I think that's something we're obviously not going to do tonight. I think the most important thing, so I work at a public university, so I've dealt with Public Records Act requests, but it really is true that every email that we send is a public record, which means that nothing that you send to or from your AUSD address is something you can keep private. Just good for all of us to know. All right, not seeing any other hands, but I'm going to move to number 11. Board members' roles in public. And this reemphasizes one of our governance norms, which we talked about some at our last governance training, which is that part of our interactions with the public must reinforce the fact that we are the only authority that we have is as 5 people as a whole board, and that no individual board member has any authority independent from that. Most of this protocol is about how we respond to community members, how we reinforce that sort of board authority structure to the public. And then this emphasis on once the board has exercised that authority by having a majority vote, that then the whole board's responsibility is to work to support that decision, regardless of whether or not they voted to support it. And that as we interact with members of the public around that decision, it is also our responsibility to reemphasize that the board has decided to do X, and that is what we all support once it's been decided. So that's my understanding of the key parts of this protocol. Are there questions or clarifications about that? Did you want to say something, Harold?
Yeah, if I can, you know, this was an area that Dr. Wells discussed with me and had asked that I sort of touch on a little bit, going back, if we can, to the next page, to that bullet, Sarah, about the board reaching a consensus or voting on an issue and what you do then. This is a really significant one, and in my experience really spells out whether a board is a successful board or an unsuccessful board, and what it's trying to do and how functional it is as a board. And it's one of the hardest things to do, because we've already heard from a few people the word passion. You're passionate about these issues, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the majority will always agree with you on a particular matter. So what you do with that when you are not in the majority, what you do with that information is really a defining moment. There's a great quote that I love. There's a book called How Not to Be a Terrible School Board Member. I hate that title because it's so negative, but that's what we work with by a guy named Richard Meyer. And it's a series of vignettes. It's worth reading, of just different stories about something happens, and then they give you the superintendent's perspective on what could have been done better, and it gives you the board president view on what could have been done different. But there's a great quote that he has, that the time to sound the warning bell is before the vote. All your negative predictions belong before a decision is made. After the final vote, the board should come together to support what is now the district's policy. Now is the time for you to turn from negative to positive. And that negative to positive is hard, you know, when you didn't have something go through the way you felt was important. One of the things that I talked about with Dr. Wells a little bit is, what do you do if a member of the community comes up to you and says, well, do you agree with what the board did? And I think a great answer is, go back and watch the video. You can see what my position was, but the board's taken a vote. This is our position. We're moving forward with it. And in fact, your protocols provide that you can't even reopen that issue unless somebody who voted in the majority is the one making the motion to reopen the issue, because it is considered to have been dealt with. Although I used my example earlier of the math class or the math curriculum where they built in a reopener to make sure that everybody felt heard. And I wanted to illustrate this with a great example, which is I was attending a school groundbreaking of building a new school, always a very exciting moment. And the community was there and everybody was happy and everybody was very excited about it. And the board president got up to speak and led off with, as you all know, I was opposed to building this school and building it in this location. And we all waited for the next sentence to be, but now that we're here today, how exciting it is and we've come together. And no, he actually continued on for a couple of minutes talking about why he still thought that this was the wrong location and the wrong school to be building. And it took an event that had balloons and excitement and kids were there and it was just such an exciting moment, and it just dragged it down. And in fact, it dragged it down so much that the superintendent actually turned off the microphone at some point and had a little discussion with the board president. So that's an illustration of that turning from the negative to the positive. It's one of the hardest things to do. And so I wanted to take the moment to kind of pause on that and share a little bit of that, because I think that is an area of struggle for really all school boards.
Let me chime in. One of the, in this area, because this is and I'm speaking, I'm putting on my former board member hat. I remember some 20 years ago, working with CSBA, one of the recommendations was that once a decision is made at a board meeting, that the item moves on with zero discussion or reference to it. That way, those who are in opposition doesn't get caught up in their feelings, and that they adhere to what you just shared, Harold, a collective moving forward, although they may have not been the majority or they may have been the majority, but there's no more discussion after the decision is made. It was not only a rule, but a practice. Absent of that, it can create chaos. And so it's important that when a decision is made, that there's no more discussion about that decision. Everybody's moving forward to the next agenda item. And I think this is where the board, at least here in Albany, can benefit greatly by looking at its strengths and looking at its challenges and looking at an area where we can improve on, because we all have areas where we can improve of. This one is notable to me as a person who observed all the board meetings, where it's important that the board adheres to a practice. Again, when a decision's made, no more discussion at this meeting regarding the decision, unless someone, for example, in a 3-2 vote of the majority comes back to next time with a new additional information and makes the motion to reconsider the issue. After that, it has to be shut down. And I think all board members have to agree to that. Otherwise, there is a potential for not running the kind of ideal meeting that we all desire.
Thank you. Those are really helpful examples. I always think about, a lot of our examples of government are like Congress, right? They're where we watch people give long speeches and they're on two opposite sides and they give long speeches and then vote and then they continue to sort of, battle with each other. But that's not what a school board is, right? We're a team that has to build community among ourselves. We have to build confidence in the community, in the direction that the district is going. And so that isn't a model of governance that we may all have a lot of experience with. We're more used to seeing politics as this very contentious arena. And I think for me, it's been a shift to realize that's not the purpose of the board, that once we vote, we don't then go on the talk shows and talk about how this person was wrong and we were right. But instead we're a team that has, it's like a family. Once you decide where the road trip is going, it's not helpful if you spend the entire trip saying, I told you we should have gone to the East Coast, right? It just makes it miserable. This can be especially hard when decisions are really hard, but I think that's when we have the opportunity to help our community rally around something that is difficult too. Trustee, yeah, sorry, Trustee Duran raised her hand, but yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that once again, we are the role models for the students. And I think, we do move on and we need to just really practice that. And I think another underlying point is that it doesn't always feel safe when board members want to remind you that you made that decision, you made a mistake, whatever that perspective is, right? But that in order to continue a safe environment and a collaborative one, we really do want to talk more about our collective and agreed upon points, right? If anything, if we're going to remind folks of stuff, it should be about how we really worked hard to come up with an agreeable decision. So just once again, in terms of a safe environment, we want to feel that that any decision I make is not going to come back to haunt me. I mean, they do personally at home, but in terms of from another board member, I would hope that doesn't happen.
Superintendent Wells.
I just want to go back to a word that you guys mentioned earlier that's really huge, and that's the word trust. Can a community trust us as a board or governance team? They're paying attention. And one of the things that help establish trust is when there's order and respectful discussion. Absent of that, the trust starts to wane. And so it's important that you have these kinds of the rules and agreements in place, and that the leader of the governance team, in this case, the board president, help to kind of redirect, if you will, when we are off course, or to remind us about agreements, and that we can rally around her to support that. I mean, because from time to time, as being human, we may slip. And it's important that when we're slipping, that we are guided back on track. And that's what a team does. And that's what we call teammanship, if you will. So, but when you come to trust, the public is paying attention to us as a governance team and how we are interacting at our meetings. And if we're acting at our meetings in the highest degree like leadership, and we are not only talking rhetoric, but congruent with our rhetoric, trust is established among our community. Absent of that, you just have the opposite, a loss of trust. And that's important to note.
Great, thank you. So I am going to move on to our last, Vice President Doss.
Okay, so this is a really good example of what we were just talking about, because I disagree. But it sounds like everybody else is in agreement. So I will do what you guys ask and won't say anything moving forward after we vote. But that seems like a very closed-minded approach to it. If we make a vote about something and it's costing the district money or it's detrimental to students, telling other board members that they can't say anything about it or shouldn't bring it up ever again and that it's closed seems like, well, I don't want to hear about that or I don't want to talk about it, but that doesn't seem like it's best for students. If we have something that we vote on, but it's not working out well for students, another board member should be able to tell their fellow board member, hey, this is not like going well. It's costing the district $500,000 a year or something. You know, you should be able to bring it up and have the discussion. It shouldn't just be, well, that's closed, because it works out in some cases. Like, yeah, let's just We voted, that's it, it's done. But sometimes it doesn't work out for the person, and then they continue to bring it up. Maybe they don't bring it up at a meeting. Maybe they bring it up somewhere else or in a different, but they might bring it up again if it didn't work out in their favor. Most of the time, it might work out in their favor, so they don't bring it up. And then this scenario that we're talking about works out because 90% of the time the votes go in their favor. But it shouldn't be so close to where you can't bring it up or talk about it, because maybe it's hurting the district or maybe it's hurting kids, and maybe you didn't realize it when you voted, but then maybe you didn't even realize it later, but maybe another board member noticed it when they were going over the budget with our CBO, or maybe they noticed something that we voted on with their own student when they were doing something and they bring it up to another board member. I don't think it should just be closed like that. If you guys are referring to like specifically you lost that vote and then like going on the tangent, then I feel like that's different. But at the same time, I don't necessarily see why we have to shut those down either. Again, the board meetings are for the board. So if a board member has something to say, they should be able to say it. Maybe it makes the meetings take a little longer. Maybe we should reevaluate like kind of how that works or something like that. But I don't know. It seems like as we go through these, it's always different. It always seems like it's different ways to like limit what the board members can say and limit like how we can run our meetings. And I don't like it. Like because maybe a vote doesn't go your way, but maybe you spent hours talking to like different community members about it. Maybe you met with 30 parents and they talked to you about it. And so maybe you like feel like you owe it to those parents that even though you didn't win the vote, you should still share their concerns that they had with people. Maybe there was a mom who works 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. so she couldn't come to the board meeting, but you met with her at 3 o'clock that day and she shared all these things with you. The vote went through, you didn't win the vote, but maybe you still want to share what you learned from that mom with your fellow board members, because that mom isn't able to call into the meeting and share them herself. And so I just don't like the idea of being limited like that. So well, you lost the vote, we don't want to hear your mouth, moving on. Like, I don't like that idea. However, to follow along with what we've been doing and being a good team member, if you guys decide to go about that way, I will do it that way. But I just wanted to share that I don't like it.
I just feel compelled to clarify and just hit the issue right dead in the center. I'm referring more specifically to when a vote is taken, and if there's a 3-2 vote, if a dissenting member loses the vote, that they don't respond, that you guys are all wrong, creating an unsafe place for everyone, creating an issue that is contrary to being healthy and professional. That's what I'm referring to specifically. I do, however, agree with Trustee Doss. There's nothing wrong with, in my opinion, sharing with people your true feelings about the issue. That's something different. But I'm talking about at a governance team, at a meeting, when a vote is taken, in order for it to be, not just in our rhetoric, a safe place for all, that we move on once the vote is decided and not make comments as a losing party, because that creates an unsafe environment. And that once you create an unsafe environment, you just can't make it safe overnight. And so how do you make it a place where, one, we want safe environments throughout our workplace, our schools, and on the governance team. So I'm referring to more specifically during a board meeting, when there's a 3-2 vote or 4-1 vote, that whoever's on the losing end doesn't comment against colleagues or staff or anyone about you're wrong. That's what I'm referring to specifically. I didn't want to skirt the issue. I wanted us to be able to address it and be crystal clear, so that when we move forward and reflect on how we're doing as a team, we can continue to improve. but you improve by being brutally honest and open with each other. And we're going to have missteps from time to time, but as a team, when we fall through the cracks, we pull someone back up and say, hey, how can we do this differently? But again, purposely being redundant to try to make a point, I'm referring to a board meeting on a 3-2 vote. Once the vote is taken at that board meeting, there's no more discussion about it.
Yeah, I politely disagree with that. Even with that clarification, I still disagree, but we'll 100% go with what the team decides in the interest of being a good team player.
So we will circle back to some of these, but we have 2 hands up, Trustee Davidson and then Trustee Boyd. I think that was the order.
So I think this is a really important one for us to discuss more. I'm just reading it again on the side here. And I think what Vice President Doss brings up is a good point. And I'm wondering if this goes back a little bit to what we talked about earlier, that we just don't have enough time to have effective deliberation before the vote sometimes. And so then the feelings that didn't get to come out before the vote and the conversation that needed to happen before a vote was made, and people could feel really comfortable and confident in their vote, that it maybe doesn't happen. And so then people feel like they still need to work it out after the vote happens. So I'm wondering if, instead of saying, we're just not going to talk about it anymore after, if we could say that there's a protocol for putting in amendments when, if there's a 3-2 vote, I know we can't make an amendment after, but maybe, I don't feel like I've seen this in meetings before, but you can take like a preliminary vote or something and we could say, hey, we're leaning this way or that way. Can we make an amendment so that we're checking back on this and we're circling back? So if people don't feel comfortable with it, there is recourse and it doesn't leave them high and dry.
Trustee Boyd.
So as far as making comments about a vote after the vote has happened, I think the question in my mind starts to become, is that constructive? What is the goal? If you're talking about something before the vote is cast, then you're sharing viewpoints. And I think it's very important to be sure that there is enough time for us to share viewpoints before the vote is taken. But if the vote is taken, if there was ample opportunity to share viewpoints before the vote was taken, which if we don't feel that there's ample opportunity for board members to share their views before the board is taken, I think that that's a different issue. But if there's ample opportunity to share viewpoints before the vote is taken and the vote is taken and I lose and I feel compelled to say more after that, I'm not sure what the goal is besides expressing that I'm upset that I lost the vote, and I'm not sure what's constructive about that. I would also say, and I wanted to, talking about the consent calendar was one thing that I wanted to raise, and I know that we're not talking about it now, but it kind of relates, in my opinion, to this. So I'll just say it now. I think that making sure that the things that are on the consent calendar are actually things that are, you know, just very straight down the middle, very unlikely to lead to any sort of controversial discussion or anything, is one way in which we can be sure that we are going to have sufficient time and that people will feel they had sufficient time to discuss things, I think. And if I'm remembering correctly, perhaps what we're talking about may have had to do with an item that was on a consent calendar that was perhaps more controversial than consent calendar items might be, which I think led to a difficulty as far as how much time do we actually have to discuss something, and perhaps feeling like we needed to go to a vote more quickly than some people may have felt comfortable with. So that's something that I would point out too. And then the last thing I'll say is I do think that it's important to be able to revisit something, if something that we vote on, anything, if any policy is not working well, if there's any concern that we have. I'm new to this, so I don't know exactly how issues or items end up on the agenda, but I would hope that if there's any item that we want to discuss in future, that we can suggest it and that it can get onto the agenda, regardless of whether you were happy with a vote or not happy with a vote, just in general. If there's something that we feel is not working well in the district, that there would hopefully be an opportunity to put it on the agenda and discuss it in the future.
So just to pull together a few of these threads, and the last protocol we were going to talk about is this parliamentary procedures, which is how the meeting actually operates, and in particular, what the president's role is of sort of moving discussion forward. I think that, so what I'm hearing is make sure we structure the meetings effectively so that there is adequate time for deliberation, which means putting agenda items where they need to be, if they shouldn't be on the consent calendar, not doing that. And also we have been talking about how to make sure that there's real time for deliberation. You know, sometimes the amount of time that we've allotted for an agenda item is entirely consumed by the presentation. So by the time we start deliberation, we're already behind. So I've been trying to work with the superintendent to make sure that that doesn't happen, because that is a challenge. And I think we are all better off if we feel like we've really had the opportunity to deliberate. And then I think this question of, you know, once we've voted, what happens next, right? So let's say we take a vote, I'm not satisfied with it, I'm concerned about the implications of that. You know, there may be a lot of reasons why I might feel compelled to, you know, go stand on the corner of Solano and tell everybody, you know, I didn't support this. So how do we channel that motivation? I think it is important that, you know, we've talked a lot about being a team. So what does it look like to be an effective team member that's looking out for kids? Is it effective to use our time to sort of blame other board members or continue to reinforce that I didn't support something after it's not serving a point anymore? You know, what do I gain by that? But sometimes we do that because we don't know what else to do. So I think Harold's example of how do you follow up on a decision where you are concerned about the effects on the budget or on students. So I think one thing I can commit to being more aware of thinking about the president's role is to look for opportunities to say, here's the concerns I'm hearing from some board members. How can we incorporate that into some kind of follow-up or evaluation to pay attention to those outcomes? The agenda process is another opportunity, right? To agendize, let's look at what was the implication of starting a field hockey team or whatever it is, right? So I think we should try to separate out some of what's happening here. Some of it is how we treat each other in meetings, and some of it is a genuine need to sort of feel like we're being responsible board members by following up to ensure that the effects that we're worried about aren't happening, or that they're brought back to the attention of the board. And I do think the agenda process, which is another protocol, is part of what we have as an option there. We're fortunate that we're a small district, so I think we have more room to sort of revisit some of these, because we don't have 5,000 contracts coming to us like a larger district. So those were sort of the themes that I heard. I think there are ways we can come back and revisit these as we revisit other protocols about how we run meetings, how we agendize future items, and then being mindful of anytime we speak in a board meeting, what is the purpose of my statement, right? Am I trying to persuade somebody? Am I angry? Am I trying to show the public that I'm, you know, taking some particular stance? Or am I helping the board to move forward in order to make sure that our decisions have a positive impact? So we're at 7:58, and the fourth, I had said we would get to 3 to 5 protocols. We got to 3. So we did not get to the last one, which was primarily reviewing how we run the meetings, which I found very instructive because it was mostly about what I'm supposed to be doing. So we can bring that up in the future. What we need to do before we talk about the next steps in our strategic planning process and future workshops is we need to approve the governance handbook, which has 3 elements. One is all of our names have been changed, or all of the board members' names have been changed. I think I'll bring up the revised handbook that Julie created so we can look at this while we discuss and vote. All right, do you see the governance handbook? So the 3 changes we wanted to talk about, one is it has a new date. One is, and we're affirming that on this date, we have agreed to this handbook. The other change, which is, I don't know where it is, our names.
It's on page 8.
On page 8.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I sort of show this as part of the record. So we are all saying that we agree to these norms and protocols. I also wanted to propose one other change. So we have on the front, sorry, I'm making people dizzy with my scrolling. So we have a set of quotes that has evolved over time. And we, I think, maybe added one last time. And I asked people to look them over, and I would like to propose removing this first one because I Googled this person and they are a sort of neo-Nazi architect person. And so I would like to propose remove this quote from our handbook. The first one by Frederick Wellington Ruxtall. And last time people offered up, each board member had the opportunity to either say if they wanted to remove a quote or add one. So I don't know if other board members want to propose changes before we vote to approve this for the current year. Yeah, Trustee Duran.
I don't know how the other board members feel if they have a quote of their own, because at this point, I'm not sure, first of all, if we just want 5 quotes, since there's 5 of us, or if we're just keeping some of them. I also am happy to share, I really looked for quotes that had to do with equity, because that is a major issue today. So I have a bunch of quotes about that I can share. So I'm just not sure what our process is, depending on what everybody else wants to do.
We can also build the addition of quotes into the rest of our strategic planning process when we talk more about our mission and vision. I feel no urgency about updating the whole page, except that once I started reading it, I did feel urgency about removing that first quote. And I also did want to give our new trustees the opportunity to add one now if they want it, or we can do it when we come back in our future workshops. So if nobody has another one they feel, or any other changes they feel moved to, we can take a motion to. But now I see Vice President Doss, your hand is up.
Yes, I wanted to add a quote. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education.
I'm going to try to type this, hang on. And who said it?
Martin Luther King.
Could you read it one more time?
Sure. Intelligence plus character, that is the true goal. That is the goal of true education.
Okay. Trustee Davidson? Oh, your hand went down. Trustee Duran.
Sure, I'll throw out another one. I have like 10, but I'll just throw out one for now. And it is, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I would take 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. And I want to ask Harold if he knows who that's from. That Einstein said that. And he's like Madonna. He only has to use one name. Oh, our president is giving his official name. Okay. And I'd also like to compliment you on your skills on Zoom now and your being able to use all these different, whatever they're called. Good job.
The Googles.
Okay, good job.
All right. Any other changes to this list of quotes? Or we can take a motion to, oops, I lost the ones I added. Approve the handbook with the new date, the updated names, and the 2 new quotes, and removing the first one.
I'll just say quickly before we vote, if possible to have a chance sometime in the future to offer a quote, that would be wonderful, as I forgot that I was supposed to be doing that now. And also if we could add the doctor to Martin Luther King Jr.
See, my typing.
Oh, and to be efficient, I could also move to approve the handbook with the additions of the new names and the new quotes and the date.
And to answer your first question, we will absolutely come back to all of this when we talk about the mission and vision. So we have a motion.
I second.
Okay, student board member Mala
Yes.
and this trustee Duran,
Yes.
President Hinckley,
Yes.
trustee Boyd,
Yes.
trustee Davidson,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I skipped you, Vice President Doss, I apologize.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I have one clarification, if everybody could just confirm that they are happy with how their name is listed on the, are you able to see your names right now? Titles and everything. Okay. All right, so the motion to approve our governance handbook passes unanimously. That was our only review and action item. But we do have one more discussion, but our meeting is supposed to be over at 8. So if we could just, I could have a motion to extend for 10 minutes so we can talk through these future workshops. That would be
Move
great.
that we extend the meeting until 8:20.
I second.
Student Board Member Mala,
Yes.
Vice President Doss,
Yes.
thank you. President Hinckley,
Yes.
Trustee Boyd,
Yes.
Trustee Davidson,
Yes.
Trustee Duran.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So the last thing I just wanted to see get everyone's thoughts on are as you saw when you read the handbook, our mission and vision statement and strategic plan is 11 years old. And so Superintendent Wells and I have talked about what a process might look like to revisit that, right? To revisit the goals, the commitments that flow from those goals, and to update that for the coming year and use that as a way to prioritize agenda items, think about our budget process, and think about how we proceed through the next couple of years. And we wanted to align this with the opportunity we have to work with Nicole Anderson, who we've already done one workshop on around equity. The idea being that equity would be sort of the guiding focus of our strategic planning process. So what we've talked about is having Nicole guide us through a series of 3 workshops that would produce that strategic plan. So the first would be to discuss our goals and mission and talk through how we think about that, what we want to lay out for ourselves. The second would be to explicitly develop an equity policy and a series of commitments around equity that come out of that goal, that set of goals and our mission. And then the third workshop would be around implementation. So how do we actually make that a reality? So the outcome would be a strategic plan, an equity policy, and a very concrete set of implementation steps. And we would bring in the achievement task force to help us use some of their data and analysis to feed into this. Ideally, we would have all 3 of these workshops happen before June so that we have this going into the next academic year. And I think this incorporates several things we wanted to do over the coming year, which is both to focus on equity, to prioritize all of our various issues, to think about how we evaluate ourselves as a board, and then to structure how we would set objectives and goals for both the board and the superintendent for the next academic year. So that's what Superintendent Wells and I would like to do. The other workshop we are going to do this spring is a workshop training around the budget, probably using a facilitator, and also at the same time as the budget advisory committee, so that we're sort of training a set of people all at once around the budget. We have other, things in the mix this spring, but I think these are the workshops we really need to accomplish, and 4 is a lot, especially since they're happening over Zoom. So this would be our set of workshops for the spring, sort of between now and the middle of June, which is not to say there wouldn't be other board meetings to focus on all of the sort of business around reopening and achievement and mental health and special education and all of the other issues that have come up. But these would be our set of special planning workshops. So I just wanted to hear feedback on that. 3 of us have worked with Nicole before, so we have a sense of how she approaches things. But like to hear your feedback on what that sounds like as a strategy for landing ourselves in June with a clear strategic plan, a clear focus on equity, and a shared understanding of what that means in terms of how we go about doing our business. And Superintendent Wells, I don't know if you want to add any more context or details to this.
No, I remember early on, both you and Vice President Doss was big on having the board trained around equity, and it kind of fell off as you guys were talking. I was texting Nicole, who responded and said she's willing and waiting and be willing to move her calendar around because she enjoyed working with you guys. So we have a meet tomorrow. So she's on board based on the text I just received from her with some sample policies for us to adopt, and not just have, she highlighted, not just have policies adopted, but have quarterly check-ins about us adhering to the policies. So I think we're right on target. Hello, anybody out there?
They're all out here. We're all getting old. It's past our bedtime. Trustee Duran.
You didn't say old, did you? I just want to say that I'm very excited about this. It's really focusing us on moving forward. So it's very exciting, and I hope it doesn't feel too overwhelming for the two new board members. Because there is a lot of work to be done, but I just feel it's such a good space for all of us to work together and focus on the better future for the district. We've been pummeled badly with the pandemic, and I think it's time for us to just really work positively going forward. So to me, this is very exciting, and I'd like to thank the president and the superintendent for pulling this together and forward thinking this all for us.
I just want to remind us that the work we do in chief leadership is incredibly hard and difficult. And it's easy to criticize, but it's hard to do the work. And none of us come with perfection. We all have lots of room to grow. And we should first be forgiving of one another and helping of one another as we move together as a team. Because one thing I can say about this board, with no hesitation or reservation, collectively, they are committed to putting kids first and fighting for them with the greatest of passion. And that's what making this work and this mission in Albany so incredibly rewarding. And I just want to say that it's okay to disagree, and that we disagree respectfully as we did tonight. And through disagreement, we have growth. When folks disagree with me, what I try to do intentionally is understand why they disagree. And I discover areas where I can learn because I lack understanding. So disagreeing is not a bad thing. It's something that we welcome, that we embrace, but more importantly, that we have a rallying cry. And we rally around what's best for our kids and our community. And if one is hurting, we all are hurting. And we just have to remember that. And I just wanted to put that out there and get that off my chest. Hello, anybody out there?
Yep, we're here.
Oh, okay.
So we could take thumbs up if this sounds good to folks. We will be mindful of not cramming it all at once. I think one thing that's important is to give the new board members time to experience enough board meetings to be able to sink their teeth into some of this. So we will be mindful of that when we schedule this out. I will also note Nicole has been working with our staff, so she knows our district well and has been working with our city. So I think this is an exciting opportunity to move Albany forward. Great. So something to look forward to, and maybe we'll meet Nicole in person one day for those of us who haven't already. So we have no other agenda items. If there are no other comments, then I will adjourn our meeting. Seeing none, we are adjourned. I will see everybody next Tuesday. Thank you so much, Harold, for your guidance. We really appreciate it and need it. Thanks, everybody.
Madam Chair, just a reminder, you got to adjourn us.
I did. We're adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Julie, did you get everything?
No.
Oh, I'm going to email you these quotes.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Well, I see you
Um,
wrote them on the
Oh, yeah, you have this slideshow.
I do. So yeah, and also
Okay.
hang on just one second.